Daniel Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the Auburn Tigers, team that went 6-7 overall in the 2021 season. Kind of a down season for Auburn, but how this team be in 2022 and why I think this team does show some potential going into next season is what we'll be over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with their team trends. Auburn 6-7 last season. They were 4-2 in their first 6 games, 2-5 in their last 7. So this team did go 2-5 in their last 7 games. That's not really a position that you want to be in there, losing 5 of your last 7, but kind of just an inconsistent season for this team. They had a couple of really good wins. I mean, they beat Arkansas on the road by 15, 38-23. I mean, the Razorbacks, they were a good team last season, and Auburn, they took care of them easily. They also beat Ole Miss 31-20, one of the best teams in the conference last season. But on the flip side, I mean, they took a couple of losses that were certainly confusing. They lost to Penn State in a close one. Obviously, Penn State's a tough place to play. Kept that one close, but did take a loss there, 20-28. They also beat LSU on the road, 24-19. Lost to Alabama, 22-24. They kept that game close. I mean, the Crimson Tide, they were a very good team last season, and Auburn played Alabama all the way to the very end. That game went into several overtimes, and yeah, just a brutal loss there. I mean, you beat Alabama that game. I mean, that makes up for the disappointing season because you knocked off your rival there, and I mean, it would have been a huge upset as well, but in the end, did still take the loss there. Lost to Houston in your bowl game, 13-17, kind of just a low scoring, kind of a messy game there, but Houston in the end got the win in a close one there, beating Auburn by 4. But roster preview going into next season, this team has got a few significant changes going into next season, but for the most part, this team does look pretty good. Bo Nix is transferring out, the starting quarterback for the past couple of seasons for this team. He's been around since 2019 for Auburn. He started his true freshman season, and he played 3 seasons for the Tigers, and last season, I mean, his stats weren't terrible. I mean, 2,200 yards, 11 touchdowns, 3 picks, and a 61% completion rate. He also had 168 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns, but he was incredibly inconsistent. I mean, his performances were inconsistent to say the least, and I mean, he didn't throw too many interceptions, didn't turn over the ball very much, but I mean, just Bo Nix, he wasn't going to, I mean, he went 6-7 with this team last season, and I mean, considering that was his 3rd season with the Tigers, I think it's best that this team looks to the future at the quarterback position. You got Zach Calzada coming in from Texas A&M, who I do feel like, I mean, his ceiling is higher than Bo Nix, but at the same time, his floor is lower than Bo Nix's is. So Zach Calzada, we'll see how he does. I mean, he played decent for Texas A&M. He was the primary starting quarterback last season for the Aggies. So kind of a questionable position. But you got TJ Finley coming back, who is certainly in contention to start. I feel like TJ Finley is more likely that he does start once we get to week 1. We haven't really heard for sure what's going to happen to start off the season, but TJ Finley does. I do like TJ Finley. He put up 800 yards when he played last season, 6 touchdowns, 1 pick. His completion rate was pretty low, but he only threw like 128 passes last season, so he didn't play too terribly much. But yeah, he's definitely, I mean, the quarterback situation for Auburn is definitely very intriguing. I feel like TJ Finley's ceiling is, I mean, definitely higher than Zach Calzada, but at the same time, I mean, Calzada has played more than Finley has, so potentially might be the right option to go with Calzada at first to start off the season. I mean, who knows? Once again, I mean, TJ Finley's been around longer, so still, once again, just an interesting quarterback situation. The backfield looks excellent. You got Tank Bigsby coming back, who put up over 1,200 yards, nearly 1,310 touchdowns last season, and Jarquez Hunter's also coming back, the second running back from this team, 600 yards and 4 touchdowns total offense last season. So backfield is going to be a huge threat for this for any team facing Auburn next season. The backfield looks really good. I mean, you got Bigsby and Hunter coming back, so that's going to be huge. Receiving core, Kobe Hudson transferring out. You also got your 3rd receiver, Demetrius Robertson, who is transferring out as well. So yeah, you do have Shedrick Jackson coming back, your 2nd receiver, but you do lose, once again, your top and your 3rd. Hudson last season put up just over 580 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then, of course, if you look at Robertson, last season he put up 530 yards and 5 touchdowns. So both of them definitely had impacts on this team last season. It's going to be tough to see them go, but at least you do have one of your top 3 there in Jackson coming back. You lose 1 on the offensive line, 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 3 in the secondary. So defensively, that's where my main concern is for this team. I mean, the offense, I would say, looks actually pretty good. It looks, I mean, your offensive line looks good. You got, I mean, the running back situation looks great. I feel like the quarterback situation is going to be all right. I mean, the receiving core definitely has got some depth, so I'm not terribly concerned there. But defensively, you do lose 7 starters, which is a bit of a concern there. So Auburn's defense, that's kind of the one main question mark, I'd say. I mean, the secondary losing 3 there is no easy thing. So we'll see how that ages. But that said, brings to the question, how high is the ceiling for this team heading into 2022? Will this team once again be an SEC contender in 2022? And the SEC West, I mean, it's such a deep division. There are so many good teams in that division. I mean, you got Alabama, who wins it almost every year. But, I mean, if you look at behind Alabama, it is, I mean, it's extremely deep. I mean, you got Texas A&M, who's going to be a national contender next season, I would say. I mean, that team should get up 10, 11 wins next season. And then you got Arkansas, Ole Miss, Auburn, Mississippi State, and LSU. All 5 of the teams that I just mentioned there could easily get 8 wins plus next season. And obviously, I mean, it usually doesn't work out that way. There's probably going to be a team or two that does disappoint a little bit. But, I mean, Auburn, I feel like this team I'm more optimistic about the Tigers than some analysts and some people are. I feel like this team does show potential. Offensively looks, I would say, pretty good. The quarterback situation, I think, will be okay. Defensively, there's a couple of question marks, but otherwise, I think this team does look good going into next season. Transfer portal and recruiting, this team does have a few players leaving. They bring in a couple. You got Worsham coming in, receiver from Miami, so that adds to the receiving core there. Craig McDonald, a safety, is coming in from Iowa State, and you also bring in Jason Jones, defensive lineman from Oregon. You do lose a tight end there to Ole Miss. Torrance, defensive back to Arizona State. Hudson, that receiver that I mentioned before, he's off to UCF. Dre Butler, defensive lineman's off to Liberty. And Height, linebacker, is off to USC. Recruiting-wise, not bad. 21st in the nation. And if you look at the SEC in comparison, you're 9th in the SEC, which is, I mean, it just shows how incredible the SEC is with recruiting there. I mean, you're 21st in the nation, which isn't bad at all, but you're 9th in the SEC, so you're kind of a ways down there in the conference. But, I mean, you got 11 4-stars coming in, 7 3-stars, so overall, not too bad. But that being said, let's look at your schedule now going to next season. You got Mercer in Week 1, followed by San Jose State in Week 2, Penn State coming to town in Week 3, then Missouri at home to start off your conference schedule. You got LSU at home to start off your October, so your first 5 games there. I mean, you don't travel on the road until your Georgia game in Week 6, so you do have, I mean, you got 5 straight games at home there between September and into October, and then you got Ole Miss on the road after your Georgia matchup. You got Arkansas home, Mississippi State on the road, Texas A&M at home, then Western Kentucky at home, and then Alabama on the road to finish out your season. So, looking at September here, Mercer, San Jose State, both easy wins. You should take care of both those teams pretty easily. Penn State, that's an interesting matchup. Penn State coming to town. The Nittany Lions, of course, they beat you last season. But Penn State, I do feel like I am more optimistic about Penn State than some people are as well. I feel like Penn State could be an 8 or 9 win team next season, but I do want to favor Auburn there. I do think the Tigers take care of Penn State next season. And then Missouri, I'm definitely going to favor the Tigers in that matchup, but I'm going to keep it in yellow, meaning I do think it's a closer matchup. So you're starting out the season 4-0 in pretty good shape, and I think if you start out the season 4-0, I mean, obviously that's great, and you got a couple of decent wins in the bag with Penn State and Missouri if you do so. Looking at October here, it's a tougher month. You got LSU at home on October 1st. You beat them, so you start out the season 5-0. At this point, you should be ranked pretty high. I mean, maybe top 15, honestly. At 5-0, and then you go to Georgia, the Bulldogs next season. That's one of your crossover games into the SEC East. Your 2 crossover games are, it looks like, Missouri and Georgia. So I mean, Georgia next season, I could see them once again being a definite national contender. So I'm going to favor the Bulldogs there. I do feel like they do beat Auburn. And then, of course, you got Ole Miss on the road. I do want to favor Ole Miss, even though I do feel like the Rebels and Auburn are going to be pretty similar skill-wise next season. I do think both Auburn and Ole Miss could definitely be in the 7 to 9 win range next season. And then you got Arkansas at home. I think you're going to beat Arkansas next season. That'd be a huge win there if you can knock off the Razorbacks, and I do think that you do. There's also a bye week between the Ole Miss and Arkansas games, so that's going to help you out as well. So you're 6-2 heading into November. I'd say this is a pretty good situation if you got 6 wins heading into November, especially with some of the tough matchups that you do have. But in November, Mississippi State, I do have you falling in that matchup to the Bulldogs on the road. It's a tougher place to play. And Mississippi State, they're not going to be great next season. I could see them in the 6-8 win range. So, I mean, they'll be decent. They'll be good enough, I think, to end up beating you in a close one. But certainly that's an interesting matchup. But I do have you beating Texas A&M then at home the very next week, which would be a massive win because Texas A&M I do expect to be second place in the SEC West and in the 10-11 win range. So, I mean, I do think that you lose to either Mississippi State or Texas A&M, just a matter of who, but you do win one of those matchups. Potentially you lose both as well, but I do have you winning one and losing one out of those two right now. Western Kentucky, easy win, and then Alabama on the road to finish out the season. I will favor the Crimson Tide there. Alabama always just a tough team, and I could definitely see them. They're probably my favorite to win the national title next season, if I'm being totally honest. Just with Bryce Young and all they got coming back, they look really good going into next season. So I will favor the Crimson Tide in that matchup. So 8-4 for Auburn next season. I do feel like this is going to be a decent team, maybe a team that could cause some noise in the SEC West. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.